Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Align, where we help you align with your true self, others, and your desired outcome to live your best life. So today I've been dying to get Dom on to talk about EQ, emotional intelligence, and private equity. I think a lot of times people think private equity is all about number crunching, it's all about deals, making money, and that's all important. But there's a whole element of human intelligence. There's a whole, emotional intelligence and how you handle personal relationships that enables you to be successful. So, Dom, we're really excited to have you on board today.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Thank you for having me on a Friday late afternoon. Looks like prime time.
I know, exactly, right? Like you have to decompress somehow, right? So this has
That's
to
right.
be it. Um,
Exactly.
but I guess to start, what is EQ for you? How do you define it?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think there's hundreds of definitions flying around there. So if I can define it really quick up front to set the level here, EQ, or really what leads to it, the emotional intelligence, I think it's really four things, and the first three play into the fourth. So it starts with self-awareness. So it's as simple as know what you feel and why do you feel it. Self-management, control your emotions. And that's something I'm currently working on with my kids. They have emotions and they just let them out. So I think that's specifically important with emotions where the reaction to them could really affect your life in a very negative way. For example, young kids hitting each other when they take away their toy.
Yeah.
Um, the third is empathy. So really know how others feel. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then the fourth point is bring it all together to really develop skilled interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, I love that. The self-control piece, I think, is so important because, especially in this day and age, people try to be a little bit more honest, more authentic. And I always argue there's a difference between being honest about how you feel and the delivery of it, right? There's a time and place to share how you feel, and you should share because your emotions that you don't release will always kind of be stuck in your body. But there's a time and place and a way that you can do it that maybe not hitting your sister when they take your toy, but maybe show other ways to that you're obviously unhappy and to not have and to apply negative reinforcement so it doesn't happen again.
That's exactly right. And I think if you combine self-awareness with self-control, that ultimately builds your moral compass. And that's nothing that is given to you. I think a lot of that can be learned. And when you talk about a moral compass, it really also comes down to different cultures. In one country, certain behavior might be acceptable or even legal, while in other countries it's not. It's really hard to say what's wrong or right. It really depends on the culture that you're born into or that you're working with.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, especially I would say now, but with 2020, we're heading towards 2021. What's keeping you up at night?
The short answer is my children. They're 2 and 4, and I think to connect it to EQ again, it is them trying to really sort out, or me helping them trying to sort out their emotions. It could be fear in the middle of the night, and every one of us is fearful, whether it's for a crazy project at work or some big step in your life. But you don't, or you shouldn't, go out and scream and try to cry it out and scream at everyone, because that would affect someone else negatively. So that's the short and somehow jokingly answer, but it's so true when it comes to emotional intelligence. The other one is, and that's more on a professional basis. At the end of the day, Swan Cap, the firm I'm working for, Swan stands for sleep well at night. And so we really try to sleep well at night. And if we wouldn't, from a professional level, it is because we're taking risk for us and our investors that we don't feel good, that we shouldn't have taken. And so our goal is upfront to not take such risks, right? And there's a lot of analysis you can do. You will never ever be able to control every single outcome. And I think the onset of the COVID-19 related pandemic is a great example where things can keep you up at night because you have a portfolio of many companies and you don't really know what's going to happen with them. And all you can do is trust in your own due diligence that it will weather the storm. But something like this, if an external shock comes and affects your work and your portfolio, but also your family, when it comes to COVID, that really, things like that keep me up at night.
Yeah, yeah. And especially because Swan Cap has the luxury of investing directly into companies, so traditional private equity. And then you also invest in private equity funds, so a fund to fund structure, right? So let's dive a little bit deeper. And I know it takes different skill sets for different types, either the direct or looking at managers themselves. But when we look at the diligence process, right, we can start at the direct companies. What are some, I mean, I think people who are not in private equity, they always kind of assume it's just a number crunchy game. All it is about like the highest multiples, the highest comp, it's all we care about. It's not true, right? And if you think about a lot of the companies who choose to partner up or like kind of exit and sell themselves to private equity, they don't always take the highest bidder. So in terms of direct companies, what are some, I think, EQ side of things you look for in your diligence process?
Yeah, that's a good point, and we have so many stakeholders and they're all human beings, and that's where really EQ, or understanding each other's emotions, is very important. When it comes to a company level specifically, yes, you can crunch your numbers day and night, and in the analyst days and associate and going up, you're mostly doing that. And it's very important to create a certain foundation of how you analyze and look at the world. However, all of that is backward looking. You can make forecasts day and night, and you will realize 5 years later, when you look back at a deal, there's a very high chance you got it wrong. Often you get the end result, or if you're doing a great job, you have a high likelihood or higher likelihood to get the end result right. But often you may have gotten there in a way you couldn't even have imagined.
Yeah.
So that is one where it's really important to also look at the people you're investing with and you're investing into. Number two is really, the times are over in private equity where you buy low, you sell high, or you buy a company, lever it up, and just by virtue of repaying the debt, everything else equal, you've created equity value because your enterprise is worth the same. Less debt means more equity. That model worked, and that's the onset of an LBO, but it worked a long time ago. It doesn't work anymore. So what needs to be done today to create private equity type returns? It's all hands-on operational value creation. Often that goes alongside a transformation, bringing a company to the next level, or helping a company that is even stressed or distressed, or something that doesn't really know what to do. We often say the BMW is stuck in the desert, that needs external help. You have a great product and firm, but you need some external influence to get anywhere else. Now you can buy such a company by paying the highest price, but it's already expensive out there. The last thing you want to do is enter a competitive auction and win a company because you're the highest bidder. So how do you do that otherwise? It's people that are ultimately selling the company. If they just want to sell out, they're looking for the highest price. That's not a deal for us. But if they look for a partner that takes over, a partner that is a private equity firm we're investing with and we're investing alongside with, that's something we want to look at. And what that partner is looking for is a partnership, is someone who can bring them to the next level together. And that means that someone could crystallize itself by not paying the highest price, but being the best partner. And I think that's really important to look at when entering into a company and into a private equity deal.
Yeah. And I would say, even, I would like you to talk a little bit also about, it's not when the relationship starts way before the
Yeah.
company wants to sell, right? Because say, for example, you find a company that you want to buy, I mean, it's too late. Like you can't build that relationship immediately, right? It's kind of like your years and years of keeping your eyes on top of them, watching them, building that relationship. So talk to us a little bit for direct deals, a sourcing process, right? Like how important it is to kind of, if you want to buy a company, you have to be at least 3, 5 years
Yeah,
ahead of time before you actually can get that relationship.
absolutely. Yeah, there's two aspects to that. Number one is, humans often show their real face if they don't need anything from you. Then they show you what they think about you. It's much harder when they're for sale and they're soliciting as many bids as possible. They usually end up being pretty nice to you and pretty caring. You want to be there before any sales process starts, before these people may even think about selling. And when I say these people, it really mean the owners. Often in our area, SwanCap focuses on mid-market control buyout deals. And so in the mid-market, often you find companies that are still owned by the person or the family that founded the person, and maybe there's institutional money in, but they're still highly involved. And so if you source a deal, you want to know them way before that deal actually starts. First of all, then they show their real face. But second, if you walk into the room and people don't know you, first of all, you will always be met with skepticism, right? So you want to change it from you're sitting opposite on a conference table. Pre-COVID, everyone is dressed nicely, brings their A game. It's really hard sometimes to see who's behind that very professional, person. You want to end up sitting on the same side of that conference table, solving a problem together that this company has at the time where they realize, okay, this person here is a real partner and he or she can help me solve a problem that I have over the next 5 years while they're invested with me.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so important to build these relationships early and consistently.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
feel like, in the past, maybe like 3 to 5, more 3 years, speaking from my experience, I've noticed people are much more givers than they are always, hey, like tit for tat, right? I think the old model in finance is always tit for tat, right? But I
Yeah.
think people have kind of realized that, like, hey, if you give first, give more, and give genuinely, you actually get paid back in tenfold. And to your point, right, you don't want to be the one giving or like giving advice or trying to be helpful when there's already beauty contests and you're already kind of competing for the attention, right? Chances are, if you give to them when they had nobody, like they know on the other side and you were the only person, they'll remember that.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. And in terms of, so that's for direct companies, right? So let's talk about the diligence process and how you apply EQ for managers.
Yeah. And that's exactly a great example you just mentioned. People remember that there is managers out there. A lot of them had issues when the global financial crisis hit, and that's a long time ago now. But what we tried during that time is to stick to the relationship. We had the benefit that we could, and they remember that until this day. When some had to adjust their fund sizes and things got a little ugly, there were a lot of limited partners that pulled out, and we stuck with them because we thought overall it's a great team that we invested behind, and it's a great strategy. And you could see where things have gotten wrong, and you could see if they applied a proper lesson learned handbook to that. And so we in 99% we back them on the next funds, which really helps. We're not money talks, but longevity talks, and really the trust in their ability to weather the storm also through the GFC and for the decade to come.
Yeah.
And so when I look at, and so that was an example where we did that. But when you look at diligencing a manager, so we developed a matrix that I call the STAR matrix. It's a bit more consulting style. And I looked at all of our investment committee papers and things that we looked at when picking a manager.
Yeah.
And for us, for the last 20 years of when this company has been doing that, it always came down to 7 attributes. And I won't name all of them because I don't want to, bore everyone with the details. But you kicked it off with finance. It's not all about money. But when you look at managers, performance is obviously a very big thing, and that's pure money. Now the downside is that's all backward looking. You can only hope someone that consistently has done very well over the past, let's say 10, 20 years in an ideal case, they can apply that handbook to do so in the future. But there's always the disclaimer, as you know, past performance is no guarantor for the future. But what is a guarantor for the future is, and that's one of those 7 attributes, is a partnership approach. Yeah, if you partner with people that you know or that you have a very high conviction they will stay in that firm for the years to come, you make the decision, is that the right partner for me or not? And I give you 2 extreme examples, and I think they really crystallized during the times of COVID. There's partners we have that update us on a weekly basis until today, really starting end of March last year. That's one extreme. There's others, and I haven't heard anything from them on how the portfolio is doing in light of COVID, other than the usual quarterly reporting. And so as a partner, the question is, who's closer to you, and what do you want? Not everyone wants to talk to the counterparty at all time. I think for us at SwanCap, we look for partnerships very much so, because we source co-investments from our partners, but our investors are also very informed because we have partners that give us the information in the first place. And so we want to check the box that before we enter into a fund, which by the way is entering a 10 to 15 year relationship. If you write a commitment today, you're in this for the next 15 years. And so we want to make sure this is a firm, a culture, and these are people we want to be with for the next 15 years. Yeah. And by no means can that be all about the money. It really is about the partnership. It can be as easy as me picking up the phone and say, our investors and us were really a little bit worried about some of your portfolio because of the end markets you're in that got affected very hard by COVID. Do you have an hour to walk me through what's happening here? And hopefully, have ways that help us sleep well at night. Yeah. And, I can say we've done very well. And that's, just by virtue of how we underwrite deals. We usually try to, look for multiple levers of value creation, and we much more like, the decent return, but not a binary risk, rockstar return or 0. We want to be in the middle. Mm-hmm. And so we choose partners that have that same mindset. I want to create a very down the fairway PE buyout type return. I don't take outsized risk, but I'm also not ultra conservative, to not really justify what they're doing.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah. And I think to your point about the longevity piece, right? Because in private equity, you're entering a 10-year. I joke around with my relationships. They're like, oh, it's like, I say it's like a 10-year marriage. They're like, Jess, I hope you don't think marriage is just 10 years. I was like, fine, a 10-year serious relationship. But it's to your point, because you're in it for the long haul, it's very concerning if a firm has a high turnover, right? Yeah. And sometimes I think firms don't realize that, managers don't realize, like, oh, it doesn't matter. Like, our senior guy or gals have been there forever. People look and they see the turnover rate, right? Like, obviously at the analyst or associate level, it's higher. That's just the nature of the system. Whether that's right or wrong, we have our own opinions on it. But it is concerning to LPs, right? Because there's no longevity. And the other end is, think about all the work that you have to do to train someone else to get up to speed on that portfolio, right? Yeah. And then the cash burn of an expense of hiring a recruiting firm to find you that talent again.
No, that's exactly right. And it's so hard. It's easy to crunch the numbers. You go in your data room, you do your analysis, you can do that in a short time frame. It's very hard to analyze culture, to analyze the emotional intelligence of your counterparty. And we're convinced what's a good partner to us is also a good partner to their portfolio companies.
Yeah.
Talking about the fund of funds model again. And that ultimately means what we spoke about earlier. If you have a high emotional intelligence, there's a good likelihood you can source great deals from great people. If you don't, if you really struggle to build connections, it's going to be harder and harder for you to buy good companies at a decent entry valuation with decent terms.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. Let's talk about some examples in which you've said no or dinged a manager. It could be in the early stages. So I'm assuming, like, let's assume they passed all the number performance tests. That's great. But
Yeah.
then share some examples when you're like, you were down to the finish line or you were pretty much across the line and something happened or you got information where you're like, you know what, this is not going to pass our sniff test.
Yeah. There's one example we got pretty far and the numbers all great, and very institutionalized US company, private equity buyout shop, highly regarded, it's been around for decades, mid-market investor. And we've done the analysis, it all looks great on paper, but what we do is we talk to a lot of our peers, because ultimately we're seeing and hearing a lot of the same things. So I'm very open to talk about experience to my peers, which are really many of whom are my friends, and they do the same. So we exchange a lot of thought. And there was one specific sponsor where, from two different independent sources, I heard that if you decline a deal with them, a co-investment, they get really, really angry. So there's really type of the self-management, looking at letting emotions burst out. And we are the customer. If we're a limited partner, we're the client. So imagine how that firm or that culture allows you to react with a company that they control. I wouldn't even want to imagine, because the customer is king, so you try to put your best foot forward. I don't want to know how they talk to the firms they own, or potentially how they talk to each other. So that was, we took a step back and said, well, that's really tough. And you should never make decisions based on one and two data points.
Yeah.
So we went to explore, and during conversations, it's like in an interview, you sometimes need to ask a few questions that are a bit more provocative. That doesn't mean they're inappropriate, but you can talk about deals that didn't go well. You can talk about failure. You should talk about failure, because that's part of the journey, and you need to learn from it. You need to accept it, and then look how people react. And I don't say I'm the king of emotional intelligence, by no means, but what I can do is see how others handle certain aspects of life. It's really not just of private equity, it's really aspects of life. And then that made me see, or made us see as a firm, oh, that's something we should be a bit more cautious about. And I guess what's good and bad at the same time is you have such a large market out there. You can cherry pick at the end of the day. And when I said, we typically try to stay in there, even if you have a bad year as a sponsor, that's true. But if you really mess up, our fiduciary duty to our investors is to also have to cut something off, and we don't like to do that. Maybe that's part of us being German. We're very, very, you drive the same car brand for your entire life. I think my mom had her job for 40 years. A lot of people, they live and breathe the same thing, so they're very consistent. And I think us being headquartered in Germany, we just try to apply that as well. And typically, if we build a partnership, there is a consistency here. So what we don't like is having to deal with emotions on the other side, because that it needs to be controlled. That gets us back to emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I love that word consistency.
Yeah.
100% with you. And I think people sometimes say, oh, I'm making this up. This person is this way at work, but actually outside of work, he's actually this way.
Yeah.
To me, that's concerning, right?
That is very
Because
concerning.
right, because it's like, how can you have two very different personalities, and like ultimately, like our human self wants to go back to its like true form, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever you are on the outside, it's gonna come back in to the workforce, and it at times when you're not in control, that's when it
Exactly.
comes out, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's actually like not only like very smart of you to ask around like all your peers, but you also ask them at different points, like not just LPs, but guys that do deals with them, guys that work internally, right? Like
Yeah.
that to your exact point, like if they can treat the customers like this, what are
Yeah.
they doing with everyone else, right?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. And you can see those firms we analyze, they went through the funnel. We see a lot, and those we bring forward, the numbers usually check the box, and suddenly you learn it's all about the people, and it's who you invest with over the next, hopefully 20, 30 years. When you talk about the next generation of leaders that's already at the firm, but certainly with the senior management throughout the next fund, and that's 10 to 15 years.
yeah, yeah,
And you can't hide who you are for 15 years. At one point, you don't want to be in a situation you write the commitment, and then someone or a firm that you thought will be a great partner for the years to come, you'll never hear back from them. That's something we just wouldn't appreciate. And so we try to also analyze those points.
yeah,
Now we have made exceptions if returns are so great that from a portfolio perspective you could say they can afford emphasizing, look, we don't want to deal so much with our limited partners, we want to focus on doing deals. I understand that as well.
yeah.
But then in times of COVID, you very quickly realize they still don't have an interest to talk to you, and so you need to almost uncomfortably push to get information that you need because you get it from everyone else, because we're used to it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's to your point. I think it's very kind of you and your team. Maybe it's a German thing. You want to be polite. I know you Germans are blunt, but you still, you want to be polite and you don't want to ask the provocative questions, right? Or
Right.
make anyone uncomfortable. But I'm with you. But then I'm also, if I'm doing diligence on you, I'm going to ask you the uncomfortable questions because I want to see how you're going to respond, right?
Exactly.
Like if you can't give me a legitimate reason of why you went to zero for these companies, and you don't tell me exactly how you've changed your process to prevent that from happening again, why would I invest in you? If you're going to tell me, oh, that's the past, we're done with it, then walk me through it.
Yeah, exactly. And we do our due diligence. I mean, ESG in our industry is extremely high, and we add operational due diligence to that. So we look at, go one step further, fraud, or things like that. Someone engaged in lawsuits that may have involved fraudulent behavior, or things like that. You really need to keep an eye on that because you don't want to get married into such a mess. That's specifically that's important on a fund due diligence. But often, when you commit to a fund, it's an empty sheet and they start investing after your commitment.
Yeah.
But there you need to analyze the people and their background, and there's great databases these days where you can really do your proper background screening, and we do that for every fund. But it's even more important on a co-investment, because it's a more concentrated risk you're taking. And I've seen enough companies that thankfully we weren't invested in, but you hear that and see that in the market that went bankrupt because of fraudulent behavior.
Mhm.
And in today's world where customers are extremely connected and where everything gets out very quickly, um, things can really turn against you very quickly if some bad things come out. So you don't you can never prevent human behavior going forward, but you can do your best to find out, has there been any case in the past, does that company do things that could even potentially lead to such adversity, and you can try to stay away from that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I think our industry is getting better with this in terms of ESG impact and really doing the diligence. But the whole idea of credentials of, oh, this is a blue chip firm, they've went to this school, they've gotten this like all this stuff, like credentials. I think time and time again, I don't know how many times our industry needs to learn this. It doesn't mean anything, and that's how people get away with stuff,
Yeah,
right? They're like, oh, they came from this brand or they came from that. You got to go under the hood because
yeah,
it's always these big firms, right, that get into trouble because
yeah,
people are not looking with them with a magnifying glass, right? When you
exactly.
look at a new manager with like no track record and didn't come from prestigious fund or whatever, you look at it with a magnifying glass, so
Yeah,
they can't get through a lot of
yeah,
stuff, right?
yeah.
So
And
yes.
it takes a lot of time. I mean, just to throw some numbers out there, if I build an average that it takes for us to enter a new fund relationship, it's 2 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Now, when I say that out there, probably anyone meeting me new now says, "Oh my God, there's this guy. I'll spend the next 2 years trying to convince him, and his firm to enter the relationship." But it's nothing compared to the years that we will be with them thereafter. So I think it's time well spent. Um, and in the downtime when they're not fundraising, you learn so much more about the person because A, they have time, B, they don't need you at the time. Now, if they're smart, obviously they're building the relationship for the next fundraise.
Yeah.
But we then also try to use that period to really get to know each other, and they want to get to know us as well, quite frankly, and not every investor is a great fit for another investor. And there's also cases where sponsors wouldn't want to partner with certain LPs, right?
Right.
So it's not that just we need to look out what they're doing. They can also look out, and they are looking out what we're doing. So you need to be the good citizen throughout all of this because you're building a partnership.
Yeah, yeah, I'm 100% with you. There's a stat, I don't want to misquote who said this, but pre-COVID, the average fundraising cycle from like first meeting to close is 18 to 24 months.
Mhm.
That's average, right? So like you're on the higher end, which is very, very normal. And this is all alternatives, right? Hedge funds, locked up, you name it, right? Um, with that said, and events like 2020 happening where I mean, yeah, there's no model that would have predicted this, right? How have you noticed or leaned on more the EQ side of things where again, all the models can kind of be a little bit ripped up, or I would say everything kind of be readjusted. So what are some like EQ qualities or things that you rely on more, um, right, like I would say right after 2020 happened, right? And then now that you're looking forward for 2021 and onwards, when you're diligencing deals and managers, what more other EQ elements are you leaning on?
Well, there was a very interesting shift in the industry that almost came overnight, starting end of March last year, where everything went virtual. So
Yeah.
we were all really big in meetings. I mean, on average, I tried, it's not even on average, I try to, at minimum, have 120 meetings per year with potential or existing sponsors that fit within our addressable market. Now
Mhm.
that's a lot, so you spend a lot of time on the road there. Um, and I guess if there's one silver lining under all this awful pandemic, it's now you can meet even more, right? And now with Zoom, I can easily meet 150, 200 or more GPs, and again, that's increasing the interaction with the existing relationship because now I don't have to fly over to the West Coast or sometimes even over to Europe to meet a sponsor. You click the button and you're right there.
Yeah.
So I think or I observed that the frequency of interaction has increased, and it moved away from in-person meeting or phone call or email to very often video call. And what I've noticed amongst this trend is you suddenly removed at least one layer that was between you and that counterpart. Why?
Mhm.
Because people now sit within their four walls. It's a more or less comfortable spot within their home. And so there's already one of those protective mechanisms, I feel like, is gone. Rather than meeting suited up in a conference room in Midtown Manhattan, you're meeting people in their living room. You're meeting people in their kitchen. Sometimes, or very often, there is a dog, a cat, or a child running around. It happens to me. That door I thought can keep the kids out, and I was thinking wrong. But it's part of. Then you see how people react. When suddenly their spouse shows up, or their internet collapses. It it got me so much closer to a lot of people, because they're more comfortable opening up. That's my view, and quite frankly, the same is true for me. I think I'm generally more of an open book when it comes to how I feel,
Yeah.
because I want to let people know, rather than waiting until it's too late and then you have a mess. Um, and I've really come to appreciate that interaction over video call. Now, has that does that mean there's new emotional things that I look out for? I don't know. I think we're still looking out for the same things.
Yeah.
I think they just come to us quicker. If it's a yes or a no on a partnership level, it it becomes clear to us much quicker. So maybe now we don't need to wait 2 to 5 years in order to find that out. Um, because there's a much higher frequency and there's a barrier or several barriers removed. You can cut to the chase much quicker on a personal level. The negative aspect here, however, is you're totally missing the touch and feel of an office and of the office culture.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example. One of the last on-site due diligence meetings I did in was near me, near New York, and that was at the beginning of March.
Mm.
And it didn't come to my colleague and me until we walked into the office what they meant with the culture they promoted to us. And it's simple things. It could be motivational pictures, speeches that are on the wall,
Yeah.
the way the office is set up between, let's say, the senior leaders and the juniors. All of these things tell you a lot. It could be the lighting, the color scheme, or whether they have a accessible kitchen or a community room. That's really hard now to assess.
Yeah.
You see people at home, you don't really see the professional environment. So a piece here is missing. Now the good news is, because we have been building relationships for a very long time, we can still leverage those where we've already done the deeper in-person meeting. And I think a handshake goes a long way. The eye contact, the politeness or not, how do you behave with someone else in the room, the etiquette. There's much more with etiquette when you're in a room together or have dinner together and talk about business or personal stuff than if you're at home. You're always in the same background and you're pretty comfortable
Yeah.
and you're looking into a camera. So that's something you could mitigate that by leaning on reference calls with peers that have had the pleasure to do that on site, maybe
Yeah.
pre-COVID. But even then, it's just a second layer of information. We need to figure out if, I mean, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but if it's going on for another year or two where we can't meet in person, then we have to see if we are willing to adjust our underwriting standards when it comes to a fund. Co-investment is a different thing. You don't necessarily have to walk the factory floors
Yeah.
or the offices of a co-invest, because we know that the sponsor we partner with already did that. And
Yeah.
quite frankly, they do that. They go on the plane despite COVID, and they meet those companies because it is so important. And the craziest thing I've seen is they did the on-site with drones. So the deal team ordered a drone pilot and they flew the drone through the facility of a company. I don't know if that's enough for me, but there are a lot of things going on.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm with you. And I candidly don't know if we're ever going to go back to like the traditional old office culture,
Yeah.
right? I think people have been a little bit shaken in a bit, and I think people have enjoyed being able to show a more authentic version of themselves, right? Where like sometimes a kid may come in, or you're more comfortable. And I think oftentimes in corporate America, I always feel like people say they can't bring their true self to work. And I could only imagine going forward, there has to be a happy medium where you're still professional, right? But you're not in a way like hiding a part of you that could actually be so much more productive at work, and you could feel like you could genuinely show up as you, right? But I hear you. Like as much as I have been loving working from home, like that I when I've gone into an office last year and this year, it definitely felt really good. I like it's just different, right?
Yeah.
I think one thing that would be helpful, and the last question is, we talked about this where number crunching, analyzing data, performance, that's honestly the easy thing. That's kind of a prerequisite, right? But what do you think are some qualities that are necessary for someone that to be a great deal guy, like a great guy who can pick out deals, pick out managers in private equity? What are some qualities you think are
Yeah.
non-negotiable?
In my case, what really helped me, and when I entered PE, I didn't know how to build a model. Like they taught me that fairly quickly,
Yeah.
and there was a program, to enter to learn that. But what I think what my company appreciated with me was the perseverance and the consistency. Just an
Mhm.
example: SwanCap spun out of UniCredit Bank. I did my first internship with UniCredit in 2004,
Yeah.
and they've been watching me ever since. And I've done a lot of internships with them, and I've stayed in very close contact. And when I really wanted this job in New York, that wasn't easy. So I was always showing up in one way or another. That of course is appropriate, but I think you need to sometimes stretch the perseverance a little bit, especially in today's world where it's so competitive. If you want to partner with a firm, especially if you want to buy control in a company, um, from potentially a founder where this is that person's life, and suddenly it changes ownership, and he or she is no longer in control, but someone else is. And so, for us as a co-investor, it's maybe not as significant as for a direct GP, but we need to also, go through a lot of doors in order to get to the end game. And for us, it's about, building relationships with new investors for us,
Yeah.
where really the perseverance is important, but also the ability to face adversity, or to face a setback in the appropriate way, and make it part of the journey, right? And
Mm.
there was, I mean, between 2004 and 2010, when I started working for the team I'm with today, there were a lot of things where they could watch me, and how I react along the way of my internships with them. And I try to, it's simple things, but I try to always be there for the team. You could say be the first one in, be the last one out, but things like that, just to show you're there, and be present and be active. And it's a lot of hard work, but I think it goes a very long way. Not only by learning the number crunching, which it is easy once you know it, because then you get the concept and you can apply it to really every deal we look at, no matter how complex. But to then also go out and foster the interpersonal relationship, because we're dealing with a lot of stakeholders. Our most important ones is our own investors, but then on a deal setting, you have the funds, you have the companies, the management, the lawyers, and they're all in different time zones in different countries. And I think that's the second part, my second part of the answer to that question: internationalization, right? I think for me it helped that I speak two languages. I could say two and a half, but don't test my Spanish. And I grew up in different parts of the world, and um, I think it is a prerequisite now, not so you can say I've been in this and that country, but so you're open-minded. Because if you do a deal with someone in Germany, it's a very different approach than doing a deal with someone in Italy, in America or in Japan, to just mention a few extremes
Mm.
between very open cultures and very subtle cultures, and anything in between. And I think you need to get out of your comfort zone, not only once, but on a very regular basis. And that's something that really helped me, shape me in a way that the company I'm working for said this is a right fit for us.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think especially nowadays where, to your point, everything's on Zoom, everything's so digital, right? Like the chances of you interacting with someone in a completely new setting, a new culture are way higher, right? And like to your point, fortunately or unfortunately, when we grow up on these things, our patience have gone down.
Yeah,
So you get, I don't know, 10 seconds to make an impression on someone,
yeah,
right? And so you're getting dinged or not on that 10 seconds, right?
yeah.
So that empathy, picking up the things, right? Like reading the body language, knowing when to speak, when not to speak, all this stuff. I think I agree with you, super important. But I want to thank you, Dom, so much. Honestly, I think one thing, many things, but one things that I really appreciate about you, and you keep bringing it up, but consistency. Like you're super consistent, you're super reliable. Like if I ask you something or when we have a plan to do something, I never have to worry about you. I don't know if it's the German in you or it's just you. I'm not sure. But I definitely appreciate that. So I always end the episode with asking everyone, because I do think everyone has a unique gift. So what do you think your unique gift is that you can share with the world?
Well, I would say patience.
Mm, love it.
And I need a lot more now with the two kids running around. But that has served me well. Sometimes you say good things come to those who wait,
Mm,
and not forcing a moment to happen, but waiting for it, and wait for the right time and place without pushing too much. I think that has served me very well in many instances. Not always, but I can live with that, and
right.
I think maybe hopefully that's one of the virtues that connects back to the consistency. And there's everyone has a lot of weaknesses, but I'm glad you ended on a positive note.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I could definitely see like you're very patient. And I would say um in a way that's also high EQ, right? Because forcing something to happen is low EQ. You're just trying to force an outcome or force a square hole to like a round peg. Like it's not working for whatever reason.
Yeah.
You're being patient and you have a high EQ to say, well, I'm gonna wait when there's just a natural fit.
No, exactly. Because if I force you to make a decision, one of us will regret it over the next 5 to 15 years. And I say 5 years for a co-investment and 15 years for a fund commitment. And so, that's similar to our investors. There's no way or no rational reason why we should push them too much.
Yeah.
You need to be on top of things, that's for sure. And, the squeaky wheel often gets the oil, but you don't want to come along as, or you want to be in a boat together. Yeah, I don't need to convince you. You need to be convinced by who I am and what I can do for you, that
Mhm.
I'm the right partner for you. If there's no need to use the advantage of a certain effect or moment to make that conviction, it really needs to build up over the long term.
Yeah, I agree with that. I love it. Thank you so much, Dom. Hopefully next time I see you, it'll be the in the flesh vaccine.
That's right. Stay healthy, and thanks for having me again.
Of course, of course. I'll see you soon. Bye, Dom.
Bye bye.